Welcome to The Tax Factor, the UK's top tax podcast from Blick Rothenberg, the tax, accounting and business advisory firm. This week with Nimesh, Shah and Heather Self.
Welcome to The Tax Factor, the top 20 business and investment podcast, which brings you all the latest news and updates in the world of tax. I'm Nimesh Shah, CEO of Blick Rothenberg.
And I'm Heather Self.
As the current series of The Tax Factor comes to a close, sad face, we're looking back at a packed 12 months in UK tax, from the general election of a new Labour government to the highs and lows of the autumn budget and a less so springy spring statement and all those Chancellor's policy shifts and U-turn. It's also the end of term for us, so we're marking the occasion by casting an eye over our tax scorecard. And let's be honest, there hasn't been a single month that's gone by where HMRC hasn't found itself under fire.
And finally, it's Wimbledon week. So, of course, we couldn't resist serving up the week's top VAT story, the M&S strawberries and cream sandwich.
But more on that later. So, Heather, it's our year-end or season-end roundup. To kick us off, quick-fire round. So I'm going to put you on the spot. I've got 3 quick-fire questions. You've got to say the first thing that comes into your head. Let's start off with, what's been your tax highlight of season 2 of The Tax Factor?
It's difficult to pick one. I think it's probably the VAT cases. We've had a great time with giant marshmallows and poppadoms.
So savoury snacks or snacks in general for Heather. Our new Chancellor, almost a year into the job, how would you score her out of 10?
Only about 3, I'm afraid. I'm not going to say must try harder because I think she really is trying very hard, but I think she's spent a lot of political capital on some relatively small changes and not actually done much to improve the tax system.
Oh, tough mark there from Heather for our new Chancellor, or not so new Chancellor anymore. Finally, Heather, this is the most important one, so drum roll, please. Who's been your favourite Tax Factor host this season?
Well, I'm supposed to say you, I think, but I'll go for Neil because I don't have to talk so much when Neil's on.
Neil Insall, corporate tax partner, and yes, he does like to talk about tax. And also, I'm going to put you on the spot with a secret 4th question now. Who's been your least favourite Tax Factor host?
No, I don't have one of those.
I thought you were going to say me, Heather. Very well handled. All right, let's go back over the last season of The Tax Factor, and we are going to try and keep to time as best as we can. Neil, thankfully, isn't on this episode on our highlights roundup. A few words, Heather, about what have been the real highlights that have stood out.
I spent some time last night just listening to our Christmas special when we looked back over the 2024, 2 budgets and an election, and you were hoping for a more stable tax system in 2025. I'm not sure we actually got that. We've had the non-dom changes, which I know you like to talk about. Rachel Reeves' first budget was pretty pessimistic and there was a lot of tinkering at the edges. She kept the pensions triple lock, but then there was the winter fuel payment. She took it away and now she's given it back to most people. We did welcome the business tax roadmap. I think that's good. We had the very unpopular inheritance tax changes, particularly for farmers. VAT on school fees, which created a lot of noise at the time, but that seems to have quietened down. And the one thing that hasn't happened, there's been nothing on blooming fuel duty, and I can't understand why not.
We might see that in a future autumn budget, but let's come back to that one because you've rattled off loads of things there, and it's quite surprising to think that actually all of that has happened over the last 9 to 12 months. Yeah, let's go back to maybe one of my pet subjects, non-doms, because it does keep rumbling on, doesn't it, Heather? There are stories still almost daily of millionaires leaving the UK, billionaires leaving. I'm not really sure what to believe, actually, because my own experience of this has been people did talk about leaving a lot around this time last year, but I don't think they found somewhere that they actually wanted to live it.
I had a client probably a couple of years ago who was getting concerned about what might happen, and he was thinking quite seriously about moving his family to Switzerland, and then he was going to keep commuting back to the UK. And when he looked at it seriously, it was going to be such a lot of hassle, and he wasn't going to have any time with his family. The practicalities of moving abroad are not as great as a lot of people think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think people realised over the summer that the UK, London, has a lot to offer. So whilst leaving is the easy option. It's actually quite hard in practice, and there's still a lot of attractions to living in the UK. But we might be getting a U-turn as well, because recent press reports have said that Rachel Reeves is getting quite worried about these press stories of the wealthy leaving the UK. But God, Heather, I can't imagine that's politically tenable, is it? Especially with all the other U-turns that we're seeing on welfare and winter fuel payments, etc.
I do wonder whether they've been a bit rattled by reforms tax proposals, which I know Neil and Suzanne spoke about, their idea of the Britannia card. The one area that might get tweaked again is the question of whether inheritance tax is going to apply. Because if you're living here for a few years, then broadly, once you're resident, why shouldn't you pay income tax? But if you genuinely intend to go back to your home country, perhaps inheritance tax is the one that might get taken off the table.
Yeah, they made such a big deal about abolishing the non-dom regime and then tightening the rules. I just can't see any sort of relaxation happening, even though it might be a very technical, under-the-carpet type measure, which no one really understands, but does appease the community. I think the damage has been done. I just think it's too difficult, really. So I'll be surprised if there are any changes on that front. And sorry to disappoint any non-doms who are being optimistic that we might see some relaxations there. Pensioners. So she did a good job at annoying wealthy foreigners. She also did a good job at annoying pensioners as well with winter fuel payments. And we've had a U-turn, which I think causes a real mess in the self-assessment system, doesn't it?
Actually, I don't think the mess is quite as bad as I first thought it was. We all hate the high income child benefit charge. And part of the reason for that is that it's taking away a benefit through the tax system and looking at the higher earner in a couple. The winter fuel payment is a bit simpler because it's broadly an individual payment. If a pensioner couple both get it, so at the moment my husband gets it but I don't, but I will get it soon. So in future we would get £200 between us. If his income's below 35,000, he'd keep his £100. But if my income's over the limit, mine would get taken away. So you don't have to do what you do with the high income child benefit, and each of you have to know what the other's earning. He has no idea what I earn. I keep all the books.
Very wise in the self-household. Another area of the population which feels somewhat aggrieved is those that have children in private school. And certain groups took this to the High Court, I think it was, but unsurprisingly, they lost. Are you surprised by that?
Not at all. They took it under judicial review proceedings. And in order to win at JR, you have to show that broadly the government has acted irrationally. And the decision was that anyone who needs their child educating, schools are still available. It's not as if they've banned them from going to school at all. So I'm not surprised they lost. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are upset. And I think it is quite harsh, particularly on children with special needs. If they haven't got a formal statement, so their education is paid for by the local authority, then a lot of parents have struggled to send those children to private school, and that's going to be even harder now.
Yeah, and lots of stories about schools closing because of VAT on private school fees. But also, I imagine the additional national insurance can't help either, because that's something that I think had a lot of attention at the time of the autumn budget. And there was a bit in the spring where businesses were saying, we're really struggling with this and having to make layoffs. And even some businesses going to the extreme of having to close completely. That's died down a little bit though, hasn't it, Heather?
It's died down, but we're seeing some quite worrying employment figures coming down. The number of vacancies available at junior levels are falling very sharply. And that's, I think, partly the national insurance imposition, but also we're starting to see businesses realizing that some basic admin jobs can be done using AI rather than real people. And I think that could be the next big disruption in the labour market.
Yeah, we'll see what impact AI has on our friends at HMRC, because they probably need a bit of help, don't they? Because we marked 20 years of HMRC and also 80 years of Blick Rothenberg this year. But we noted that it was 50 years since the basic rate of income tax was last increased. Although I've got a bit of a stat which is saying around frozen allowances, because we're going to possibly see this being extended now by Rachel Reeves, possibly until the end of the decade, that has the effect of being a 5% increase on the basic rate of income tax. So I don't think it's quite true to say that the basic rate income tax hasn't increased in 50 years because of that effect of frozen allowances. But specifically on HMRC, we do give them a bit of a hard time, and I suppose sometimes I do feel a bit bad. They should also be praised for some of the areas of improvement that they're making in maybe how they're handling customer service. But on balance, the Public Accounts Committee, the government, they're not very glowing of HMRC, are they, Heather?
I think HMRC themselves accept that their customer service hasn't been what they would want it to be. I did listen to the senior team in front of the Treasury Select Committee a few weeks ago, and one thing they did confirm there is that they are now in the procurement phase of a brand new telephone system, which they say will be able to cope better with the volume of calls and will stop this thing of where you just get cut off after about an hour. So I think there are improvements coming, and I think they're very keen to move into using much more digital technology and AI. Let's just hope that they continue to get the money they need to invest in their systems and so on.
Yeah, although I find it still quite amusing that they're going to spend probably millions and millions on a new telephone system when actually the direction of former CEO Jim Harrow was to say, we want more self-service, we want to be more digitized, we want people to use the government gateway. Yet here we are talking about phones, new phone system, and Jim Harrow saying, actually, we don't want people to use the phones. What is the strategy with HMRC there?
I think they want as many people as possible to use the digital route. But I help my mum and another elderly relative with their financial affairs. There's no way that a lot of elderly people can just manage using the digital technology. Even using the phone technology isn't easy. And I think HMRC are perhaps coming to accept that for some things, phone is the quickest way to sort something out. And I think particularly for the agent helplines, if somebody from Blick Rothenberg has a problem on behalf of a client that they're trying to chase up a repayment or something and the system isn't telling them something, there comes a point where they need to get through on the phone.
And I think they're going to have more work to do, though, aren't they? Because fiscal drag. So we talk about it a lot. It's a terrible way to raise taxes. I'm using your quote there, Heather. And you sent around to me earlier today an interesting article from the economics editor of The Times, David Smith, who does some great columns. He made a really good point, which was everyone is in uproar about the farmers and winter fuel payments. No one really talks about fiscal drag because that's really the thing that's hurting a lot of people and hitting them in their pocket without them knowing it. Why do we think that the press and the world isn't talking more about fiscal drag?
Because most people don't understand it. It's just not something. If you get your pay slip and it tells you how much tax has been deducted, and then you get a pay rise and there's a bit of tax taken off that, you don't realise that your tax allowances haven't gone up and therefore your tax is more than it would have been, because at a headline level, it doesn't look as if it's going up. It's just that it's not taking any account of inflation. And people don't really appreciate the impact of inflation, even though everybody understands the basics. They don't really think it through.
Yeah, and in the article from David Smith, he talked about fiscal drag raising about 40 billion by the end of this decade. And as I said before, it's the same effect of basic rate income tax increasing by 5%. If you were Rachel Reeves standing up in October, November time and saying, right, I'm going to increase the basic rate of income tax by 5%, I don't think she'd be in the job the next day, would she?
No, I think it's been a horrible but really successful tax policy. It's raised enormous amounts of money. And in the old saying that they're plucking the feathers with the least amount of hissing.
Yeah, and they may not have had to go down this route had they sorted out the pensions triple lock. I know I'm not going to make any friends by saying that, but also they've had their hands tied behind their back around the tax triple lock as well. No increases to income tax, national insurance and VAT, and also actually the quadruple lock, really, because they threw in corporation tax there as well. One area that they did go for, though, was inheritance tax. But this raised absolutely let's be honest, and look at the carnage that it's caused, especially with farmers, less so around family businesses, but they're equally affected as well. Do you think we'll see any rowback, any U-turn, which is our favourite phrase this week, on farmers and family businesses?
I don't think so. If they do a U-turn on that as well, then it's just going to get more and more difficult to get anything through. If they back down every time somebody shouts, they're never going to do anything.
Yeah, that's right. But we're still here in July when the autumn budget was last October, and we're talking about non-doms, winter fuel payments, farmers. This budget has dragged on beyond any other budget that I can ever think of in my time in practice in over 20 years. What are we going to see then at the next budget? I just didn't think we'd be here again.
I hope we don't get all the very fevered speculation that we had last time, but I suspect we will. I think her arithmetic is going to be incredibly tight because the economy doesn't seem to be doing much to grow, and she's had to give away amounts of money on the winter fuel U-turn and then also on the benefits bill. Apparently that's going to raise, to use your technical term, as well. So she's not going to have any headroom. She's either going to have to raise taxes and she's done the spending review, so it's too late to go around and cut any more spending, or they're going to have to find a way to tweak the fiscal rules and borrow more. So she's not going to be in a very easy place.
Even if she's here at all, because some commentators have said her position is now perilous. We might be talking about a different Chancellor in October. How likely do you think that is? And can you think of any immediate candidates that would take that job?
Well, at Prime Minister's questions this week, she was apparently looking very upset just behind Keir Starmer, and everybody was speculating about whether she was about to resign. Apparently that was a personal matter. Number 10 have confirmed that they still see her being there at the end of this Parliament. I think Keir Starmer is very stubborn. He will not want to back down on a decision he's made. Other candidates, I think Yvette Cooper would be very good, but I also think she's doing a good job at the Home Office. I think Wes Streeting is really making an impact on health, so I hope they don't move him. Torsten Bell is a relatively new minister, but with good experience. He used to be at the Resolution Foundation. He's a pensions minister. Possibly he could get a fast promotion. Who knows?
Yeah, and James Murray has been doing some things with HMRC as well, and I wonder if he's got his eye on the top job of Chancellor. But I hope Rachel Reeves does get another crack at the autumn budget. I'm not as convinced as Keir Starmer that she will last the lifetime of this Parliament. Maybe Keir Starmer won't as well, which means a whole new change of regime as well before the next general election. It'll be really interesting to see what happens during the summer recess. I really hope, like everyone listening to this podcast, we shouldn't get that crazy speculation. I think I'm going to be disappointed around that, because I think it's already starting about increases to capital gains tax, exit taxes, what she might do on breaking the tax triple lock, quadruple lock. She's going to have to find the money from somewhere, and it seems pretty nailed on that the frozen allowances are going to remain beyond the lifetime of this Parliament. But the one thing that I think might happen finally, and maybe Rachel Reeves has been listening in on the tax factor, is fuel duty. You mentioned it before. Why don't they just do this?
I really don't know, because I don't know if people understand, fuel duty is not a percentage of the price of a litre of petrol. It's a flat amount for each litre. And that's why back in Gordon Brown's time, they introduced the fuel duty escalator so that it would automatically go up by at least inflation and probably a bit more. But in fact, it's been frozen for about 11 years now. And then Jeremy Hunt gave a temporary 5p discount as a result of the spike in petrol prices around the war with Ukraine. That was a reasonable thing to do at the time, but I remember how much petrol prices were then. They were heading rapidly towards £2 a litre. They were certainly over £1.90. It's now about 130 pence a litre. It would be entirely reasonable to put that 5 pence back on. It wouldn't raise an enormous amount, but at least it would send a signal that actually fuel duty, it makes sense to raise it in terms of heading towards net zero. There's a longer term problem. If we all do start using electric cars, there'll be no fuel duty at all, and that'll blow another hole in somebody's budget, but that's perhaps for another day.
Yeah, let's see if they do finally do something on fuel duty, because it's been over a decade since it was frozen. And I read something the other day that it's cost the Treasury over 100 billion in tax revenue. Imagine what you could do if you were Rachel Reeves had you pocketed that amount. Now, she may be due, though, for a windfall, because lots of interest this week on Marks and Spencer's and their glorious strawberries and cream sandwich in honour of Wimbledon, presumably. And apparently the Japanese are a big fan of having fruit in their sandwich. It's thrown up a huge amount of that debate in our community, hasn't it, Heather? I'm going to put you on the spot again. Is it, you've had one apparently, haven't you? I think you've bought...
Purely in the interest of research, I went out and bought one today. I tried it out on my 2-year-old granddaughter and she loved it. So it's definitely a success.
And for your granddaughter, standard rated or 0 rated?
I think it's 0 rated. It's a sandwich. It's not confectionery. If a strawberry sandwich is confectionery, then what about a cucumber sandwich or a pork and apple sandwich? How much apple do you have to add to a pork sandwich to make that confectionery? I think it's a sandwich. It looks like a sandwich. It's a bit sweet, but it's definitely a sandwich.
So maybe in Tax Factor season 4, 5 or 10, we'll be here talking about, I'm sure Neil Insull will be here talking about the famous VAT case for Marks and Spencer's and their strawberries and cream sandwich. And maybe, Heather, we will be quoted in one of the tribunal cases on the Tax Factor as well, about your granddaughter's expert assessment on whether it's standard rated or 0 rated. I'll be keen to listen in to what Neil has to say about that.
The Tax Factor from Blick Rothenberg.
Before we finish up, because we are almost out of time, a bit of end-of-year report card from both of us, I suppose. What do you think, in a few words, Heather, about the last 12 months on tax?
It's been a bit too interesting. Let's make tax more boring.
Oh, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. The crazy speculation last year, which I absolutely hated. My phone never stopped ringing, actually, about clients wanting to make gifts and sell down assets. It was an awful time to try and advise clients. I hope we don't get that again. But I think you're right, Heather. There's just been far too much on the front pages on tax, and we've touched on a number of those things today. Non-doms, pensioners, farmers, family businesses in general with the national insurance rise. I really hope things do calm down. I really hope we don't get a change of Chancellor either anytime soon, because I think the system and the economy does need some level of stability as well. But it does keep us busy on the tax factor. It's going to keep us busy, I fear, going into season 3 of the tax factor as well. Heather, it's been a pleasure to be with you on today's episode and throughout season 2 as well. That brings us to the end of this week's episode and the end of this series of The Tax Factor. I've got a real sense of deja vu because this time last year, we're heading into summer break and wondering what the Chancellor will do and what she might have up her sleeve in her very first budget. We've talked a little bit today about what she might want to do in her second budget. So I think we've got lots of things to talk about going into season 3. And fast forward 12 months when Heather and I will be doing our season 3 review, there'll be more questions and probably less answers if this year is anything to go by.
We'll just have to wait and see, but you can be sure we'll have plenty to say about it when the Tax Factor returns in a few weeks. As always, we'll bring you the latest tax news and analysis from our regular team and a few new voices too. In the meantime, you can stay up to date by visiting our website www.blickrothenberg.com. and we'll be sharing updates and insights throughout the summer break.
2025 is a big milestone for Blick Rothenberg as it's our 80th birthday. To mark the occasion, we'll be releasing some special editions of The Tax Factor over the summer, travelling through time to revisit some of the major moments in the UK's tax history. We've been there through it all, from the introduction of the PAYE system to capital gains tax to an eye-watering 98% tax rate and the arrival of VAT and more tactics from the government like frozen thresholds. So do keep an eye or ear out for wherever you usually listen to The Tax Factor. As it's the final episode of the series, I want to say a huge thank you to all our presenters over the last 40 plus weeks. And of course, our brilliant production team behind the scenes here at Blick Rothenberg, Michael, Paul, Kerr and Josh. And a special shout out to our voice of God, Darren, who you hear every week. And finally, thank you for listening and your feedback for helping The Tax Factor become a top 20 UK podcast. Up there with the likes of Moneybox, Martin Lewis, and Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO. That has been so brilliant and proud to see.
I'm Heather Self. Have a fantastic summer.
And I'm Nimesh Shah. We'll be back later in the year. Have a great summer. For once, I'll have the last word. That's The Tax Factor.
That's The Tax Factor. We're taking a short summer break, but we'll be back in August with more tax news and updates. You can listen to previous episodes of The Tax Factor on all top podcast platforms. And subscribe to make sure you don't miss new updates. Until next time, it's also goodbye from me. Copyright 2025.